Welcome to Women of the Wild,
where education and opportunities are key,
and friendships are made to last a lifetime.
Did you get it?
You think we got him? You think we got him? We got him. We said that yesterday.
All right, Skylar, what do we got here?
We've got a nice looking rip-off.
Yeah. Oh, there she is. Woo! You dropped our great ghost.
Give me a hug.
Hi, this is your host, Felicia Marie with Women of the Wild. We today have our guest speaker of Megan Denean here from Michigan. Hi there, Megan. How are you doing?
Hey, Felicia. I'm good. How are you?
Very well. So we are going to jump right into this. And I know you have a lot to talk about, and we have so much to learn about you and what you do. So as people are getting to know who you are, can you tell us a little bit of how you got started in like who you are in the outdoors and what you do?
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Megan Denean. I'm an airport wildlife biologist for USDA Wildlife Services. It's Selfridge Air National Guard base in Michigan. It's just north of Detroit. I have been in the wildlife field working for 8 years now, and not including the time spent doing odd jobs throughout college, but I'll hit on that shortly. I am 29 years old, and I have had the opportunity to work at 7 airfields in 5 different countries.
Wow. What countries have you been in?
I can't say a handful of them, but undisclosed locations in Southwest Asia, working for the military, as well as Latvia, out one of the Baltic states out by Russia, and then a couple states within the United States, Michigan, and Alaska.
That's incredible. And you were in Alaska for a period, like a stint for a while, weren't you?
Yeah, my first job right out of college was in Kotzebue, Alaska, which is on the Arctic Ocean. So it was a really cool experience.
I bet that was absolutely just a stunning environment but also challenging to be in, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So what got you inspired in like a passion in the outdoors? Did you grow up with an outdoor background or an animal background?
Yeah, so I grew up in a place called Hudson, Michigan, and it's a small town in the middle of Michigan, farming community. Both my grandparents are farmers, grew up in the country, so I've been an outdoorsy kid all my life, not necessarily by choice, but that was just the environment I grew up in. And my dad took me hunting and fishing all growing up. He took me out hunting ever since I can remember. And once I was of age, finally got to go to hunter safety and got my first deer when I was in middle school. My family also did a lot of camping and family vacations. So when I was, I think, 8 years old, we did this big road trip from Michigan all the way out to Wyoming and hitting a bunch of the national parks. And ever since then, I knew I wanted to do something in the outdoors. My first experience of like seeing a bison in person just completely amazed me. And my mom had me and my brother write essays on, what we experienced on that particular trip. And I wrote in there that I wanted to be a park ranger. And at the time, I had no differential between a park ranger or a DNR officer or a wildlife biologist, but I knew that this was the field that I wanted to go in.
That would be an incredible trip, especially to experience with your family. I've made that trip frequent from Michigan over. My sister used to live in Wyoming and Montana, Colorado. So that experience alone, I can definitely see why it would have drove a passion to be a part of that. And with your with your passion and your mission of what you do, you work for the USDA. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do with the aircrafts?
Yeah, so when as an airport wildlife biologist, my job is to reduce the number of damaging wildlife strikes with aircraft. So what that means is when you are flying to and from any big city, general aviation, any airfield, there's always a risk of hitting birds or other wildlife when you take off. I mean, we share the skies with birds. This has been an issue since we started flying. The first documented bird strike was Orville Wright in like 1907, where he talked in his diary about hitting a red-winged blackbird. And we've been hitting birds ever since. So it's just, you know, our airplanes are getting bigger, they're getting faster, we're in the air more often. So it's definitely a risk that's out there. Don't be afraid to fly. Like the chances of it being a damaging strike are really low, and you know, to actually have something happen is extremely low. But you know, it's not just about the aircraft, it's about this wildlife too. I mean, when an aircraft hits a bird, you know, it can cause damage to the aircraft, but it's almost always fatal for the bird.
Sure. And do you, with that, is the management upon like hunting seasons depicted off of what you guys are seeing?
Not so much. I mean, every airfield is a little different. So I'm in Selfridge Guard Base, which is kind of in the city. So depending on hunting season stuff, don't really reflect what's going on my airfield. I mean, obviously you have your migration seasons and stuff will definitely affect what you're seeing on an airfield for sure. But they don't really reflect the hunting seasons. You don't see like an influx of deer during deer season or anything like that.
Right. Well, I didn't know if you guys are seeing a big influx on when birds are, you know, compared to a hunting season. Like if during the fall, during the migration, if you're having like this massive influx of what you're hitting, if those numbers just begin to skyrocket on you guys.
Oh yeah, so every airfield is different. So when it comes to migration seasons, what's hatching, and it just really depends on the habitat that you have at your airfield. So when you have, you know, so at Selfridge, we're right next to Lake St. Clair, so waterfowl, you know, we see a lot of waterfowl because we have a lot of water around us. But yeah, you'll see influxes with like migrations and stuff. But it just all depends on where you're at and what kind of birds are migrating and when. So I know in Michigan, you know, we get turkey vultures in the summer, but my colleague down in Florida, she gets them in the winter because they overwinter down there. So it really just depends on where you're at and what's moving at that time.
What is the craziest bird you've ever gotten off a plane?
I don't know if it was, so it's kind of crazy because of where I was at. When I was up in Alaska, we were doing some wildlife surveys. We were just looking for birds, and we saw this swallow that looked really strange. And so I took pictures of it, and it flew away, and it was on the airfield. And once I started looking into it more and doing a bunch of research, we realized it was oh my gosh, Eurasian swallow, which was really cool to see because it was thousands of miles from its, you know, homeland. So it must have got blown in or something like that.
Did you guys ever get like ptarmigan or anything like that in Alaska?
Yeah, so we did see, I saw one bird strike up in Alaska where a propeller plane was taking off in a small general aviation airfield, and it did strike a bunch of ptarmigan. So yeah, they're definitely around there.
Right. Yeah, I can only imagine that the dynamic of species that you guys see are probably pretty diverse. You know, as you're traveling through the different flyways, whether you're in the Midwest or the Central, I've seen these flocks of geese and cranes and everything like that. And you know, there's the big iconic Hudson with all the Canada geese that, I mean, like you said, it's not something to be fearful to fly, but it's fantastic that you guys are doing that and doing the research. What type of backing happens that you utilize? Like what information do you guys put into play when these happen?
Yeah, when we have a bird strike, what often will happen is you have your maintenance crew will go out. And again, I would say majority of bird strikes are non-damaging. We call it snarge. So snarge is the remains of a bird on an aircraft. So when a bird hits a plane, just like when a bug hits your car, it kind of splats. And so oftentimes when we see that, we only see maybe some blood, some tissue, some feathers. So we'll do our best to collect what we can. And we document, you know, time of day, where that aircraft was, where was it flying, and where did it hit on the aircraft, and we will collect all these samples and we send it to the Smithsonian Feather Lab, all the way in DC. So the Smithsonian Feather Lab collects all these samples from all across the country. So then they have their machines and they have a variety of different ways and techniques and machines that'll help identify what kind of bird it was. So they can do anything from just comparing feathers to feathers that they have in their collection, or they do have a DNA analysis machine where they can actually just test to see what the DNA is. And so then we will get this information back. And this is really useful for us as managers because we have an idea of what we're hitting. So if we're getting a lot of, say we're hitting a lot of waterfowl, then we know, wonder if we have a water problem somewhere on an airfield. Can we modify the habitat to make it less attractive for waterfowl? Or we're hitting a lot of swallows. They must be really attracted to some sort of maybe food source or a shelter source near the airfield. Can we try to modify that? So it's really important that we learn at each airfield what we're hitting, where we're hitting it, when we're hitting it, so then we can help better manage that. Whether it's we can say, hey, pilots, maybe not fly during these times, or maybe not do practice flights during these times, and these times would be better. Or simply, hey, these trees are really causing a lot of issues because they're housing a lot of different species. How about we just remove these trees off of the airfield and just completely remove that hazard altogether?
Now, does it fall just within the airfields, or do all routes get alternated based on where birds are getting hit? Do they keep track in the air where these happen? I mean, I'm sure most of the time you don't even know that they happen. You just know they happen between point A and point B. But does it ever, disrupt the path that the planes have to take?
We try to work with surrounding communities and stuff and say, hey, this is a situation, these are the things that we're looking at. So I think it's 90% of bird strikes will happen below 1500 AGL, which is above ground level. And that's about 5 miles out of the airfield. So we'll take the airfield, do this 5-mile radius and really see what kind of habitats are around there. If there's new developments, hey, can we try to modify, you want to have a really pretty pond. Well, could we try not to have that? Or can we try to drain it or have some drainage, or, try to work with those surrounding communities. And simply because a lot of pattern work that aircraft do are often within that 5-mile radius. And, if you're at, again, every airfield is really different. So if you have an airfield that's right next to a, some sort of habitat that's really attractive, I believe they're going to try to avoid it, especially if there's certain times of year. I know at my base, sometimes we get this huge gull influx. There's just this wall of gulls that are hanging out on the river. So, we just say, hey, let's just take off the other direction for a few days until that population comes down a bit.
Okay. So you just alter the path when needed.
When we can. Yeah. Sometimes it's, inevitable, but we try to.
So do you ever get, I'm assuming some of these are private lands within that 5-mile radius. Do you ever get any kickback from the private landowners of not wanting to change, say, that pond or that tree line or something?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, it just depends on what they're looking at, what they're doing. Every situation's different. Oftentimes when you're like, hey, it's a safety risk, they understand, but there's other times where they're like, what's my little pond going to do to your whole airfield? I mean, that's just it's a situational basis. We just do what we can. It's like, okay, well, if you do want to have a pond there, well, here's some recommendations on how to keep geese from wanting to come in that. And, we try to just work with these people so that we can both have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, no, that's completely understandable. And like you said, once you bring up the safety concern aspect, it's hard not to want to help in a situation like that. I can see some, grumpy man. I've worked so hard to put this here, and now all of a sudden you're making me change it. If you ever get that type of kickback, but it's everything that you guys do with this wildlife management. You don't just stop at that, though. You trap and you do things like that on the airfield as well, correct?
So a typical day-to-day, a good way to really explain this, there's 4 types of direct control that we do on an airfield. The first is habitat modification. So we'll look at the airfield as a whole and we see, is there water, shelter, food? Which of those 3 components are on the airfield, and can we modify them? Can we try to make it less attractive for wildlife just to be simply in the area? The second is going to be exclusion. So creating man-made barriers to make it more difficult for wildlife to be on the airfield. So for example, you have an 8-foot fence, around an airfield. That's because white-tailed deer can't jump over 8 feet. Just creating, covering dig unders and stuff in fences, putting out bird spikes that just keep birds from wanting to perch on signs and stuff, just creating that man-made barrier. The third step is harassment. So harassment is going to be just making the place as undesirable as possible. So we shoot pyrotechnics at birds, which are like glorified bottle rockets. It's just really to scare birds out of the area. We can use bird cannons, which are just propane cannons that make really loud noises, and it scares the birds out of the area. We just make it a pretty scary place.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fourth option is completely removal. So the big part of my position is raptor trapping and relocation. So we put out traps that are modified traps for owls, hawks, and falcons that we catch on the airfield. We put federal bans on them, and then we work with our state agencies to find, suitable habitats for these different species to relocate them and release them, and basically tell them not to come back. And then at the very end, very last resort is going to be lethal control. So that is doing, deer, coyote removals and stuff like that. And at my base in particular, all the deer that we remove, we are able to donate that meat to charity.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, when you relocate these animals, how frequent do they actually come back?
It depends. There's been a lot of studies into it, so I could go really in depth with this, but it's not very often.
Okay.
If a bird has its territory established, they are more likely to come back. But oftentimes they're juvenile birds, because juvenile birds are the ones going to get caught. It's that red-tailed hawk that's trying to hunt for the first time. It sees our trap. It's an easy target. It gets caught. We relocate it. Next time it's flying around my base, it's got to go, I remember what happened there last time. I'm not going back there. And they try to move on.
Right. And then with the lethal, that's if like you have a deer coming across the airfield or something like that, that's when you would use the lethal force to remove them.
Yeah, so when it's within proximity of the airfield, it's definitely, we don't want them there, because when a deer strikes are really uncommon, but when they do happen, they're very expensive.
Oh, I can imagine the damage that it could do.
Mhm.
Now, as you said, like coyotes, do you get issues with foxes and things like that? Is there management for the other critters like the varmints and things like that are coming in to, do they ever cause disrupt in aircraft as far as like maybe a raccoon getting into the underneath of a plane or things like that? Do you deal with any of that?
They can. We do have a pest management group on our airfield or at our base as well. And again, this goes right back to like every airfield is so different. Some airfields, maybe they have woodchuck problems, maybe they don't. At my base, coyotes like to hang out. We have a lot of urban coyotes, hanging around the suburbs and stuff. So they definitely like to come out and hang out a bit. Out in Alaska, I remember, having muskrat running across the runway and having porcupines that I was catching often. And with the porcupines, you just catch them and relocate them. But it was a lot of fun. So yeah, that's the one thing I learned was every airfield is very similar, that they have a tower, they have runways, they have taxiways, but they are so vastly different when it comes to how we manage the wildlife there. And I think that's what makes me enjoy this position so much, is that it's such a big problem solving position. Something that might work in Alaska doesn't work in Michigan. It worked in Michigan, but it's not going to work in Latvia.
Right.
So it's just been, a really cool ride of just seeing, getting to come up with different solutions and stuff for every issue.
Oh, I can imagine a position like that, keeping you on your toes and keeping that critical thinking always on point. It's really attractive and interesting to me how diverse the creatures are that you guys, even with the different divisions, the different species that you're going to encounter in a position that you have, and having that live interaction of trapping or the lethal removal, but being able to like trap them, relocate them, that has to be pretty rewarding to know that you just removed that animal from that cycle, that you're not only protecting the plane and its passengers, but you're also protecting that creature. I think that's a really awesome thing that, like, I didn't know this was a thing until I had spoken with you and learned your story a bit. And it was very intriguing to me how much you have that interaction on base with this wildlife, and on average, how many animals do you think on a, like, whether it's daily, weekly, that you have that face-to-face interaction with these creatures?
Oh, I would say daily. I get to work with wildlife every single day. It gets a little slow maybe in January, February, but I'm seeing wildlife every day. Trapping is all going to be dependent on, what season it is. So right now it's spring migration. So we're starting to see, raptors are starting to come back home, and then they're going to kind of, get quiet for a little bit while they're nesting. And then late summer, you're going to have everybody migrating back. You're going to have a lot of juvenile birds that are trying to, hunt for the first time again. And then my favorite are the snowy owls that come down to Michigan. And when a snowy owl comes here from the Arctic, they're looking for the closest thing to home that they can, which is a big, wide, open, flat space. So snowy owls love airfields. And so we get to work with those all winter.
That's really, they're gorgeous creatures. So I bet that's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So what with the USDA, how was your start to that? If we had a female that wanted to get into a position like this, or even, a different division or something like that, how do you, what degrees do you need? How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, so I went to Michigan Tech University, which is up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I have a bachelor's degree in wildlife ecology and management. You basically just need any type of wildlife. You got the wildlife and fisheries. Every college kind of calls it a little different. When I was at Tech, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't even know the airport work existed or wildlife services even existed. And I knew I wanted to do something outdoors. I knew I was in the right major, but what was I going to do from there? And I had a professor tell me, they're like, just try to get experience, because I'll be honest, I was not a straight A student. Not saying I struggled, but I definitely was not a good test taker. And so I just set out to try to get experience. And in the 4 years that I was at Michigan Tech, I ended up working 9 different jobs. And doing that, especially when you're in college, is really awesome, because you're going to learn what things you like and what things you really don't like.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I learned for myself that I did not really like working in a lab, and I liked being outside. I liked doing things with my hands and having something different every day. So big thing I always tell people is try to get experience where you can. And because seasonal jobs aren't going to last forever, and you're going to learn a lot, whether it's, again, it doesn't necessarily have to be a good thing. It could also be like, wow, I never want to do that again. And at least you know that, because it's better to learn that when you're in college doing seasonal work, rather than going out to the workforce and then realizing, oh gosh, I'm in a full-time job now and I hate this.
Yeah.
So,
And I think, that mentality, I think it follows through on so many things. That's one of our big mottos with what we do here at Women of the Wild is, if you don't know, try it, because you don't know if you like it or not. And the least you're going to do is learn that you didn't like something. But you never know. You could try it and you could absolutely fall in love with it. So like you said, being in a lab versus being out on the runway and being hands-on in it, everybody has their different quirks of what they like, what they don't like, and finding that out for yourself is really great.
And now a short word from our sponsors.
Hey everyone, Andy Lehman here from ACC Crappie Sticks. Just want to let you know about our crappie baits and jig heads. We have a wide selection of the hottest colors and big eye crappie jig heads in the most popular colors and sizes. Check them all out at accrappiesticks.com. Thank you.
Do you enjoy the great outdoors and hope to share that excitement with your kids? Now you can through Dr. Josh Farr's great collection of books. Share your love of nature while also teaching valuable life lessons on friendship and learning the alphabet with books like The ABCs of Hunting. Plus, the ABCs of Hunting workbook is the perfect learning tool to captivate young readers and create a foundation for your future hunter. Find out more about these and other books from Dr. Josh Farr at drjoshfarr.com. That's DRJOSHFARR.com.
Well, you see, trappers are a special breed of people. We're dedicated, committed, and passionate about what we do and who we are. Each and every one of us has an intense desire to be the very best we can. So in the world of skinny jeans, man buns, and pumpkin spice lattes, sometimes you just have to stop, push back, and tell the world, that's not me. Whether you're from the far north or in the deep south and anywhere in between, Southern Snares can help you succeed at getting the job done and being who you are.
Girls with Guns Clothing is a proud sponsor of Women of the Wilds podcast. If you are looking for hunting gear, be sure to check out our new fall collection, including the launch of our new Artemis Generation 2 lineup. With Girls with Guns, you know that our gear has been designed and field tested by women who actually hunt and wear this gear. We have an amazing team of women who contribute and share their ideas and extensive field testing so that our gear works for you in multiple hunting environments. We build our gear for women of all shapes and sizes, made by women for women. If you want to try out GWG, you can go to gwgclothing.com and use WILD15 for a discount off of your first order.
We would also like you to check out Sawmill Creek Bait and Lures, RMC Custom Calls, Atlantic Coral Enterprise, Blast and Cast Guide Service, Epler Fur, Feather Moon Calls, Shangalaya Safaris, Shelly Emmer with Dirty Girl Guide Service, and Hunting Day Podcast. And now back to the podcast.
What nine jobs did you have when you were in college?
Oh gosh, I knew you were gonna ask this. Oh
Sorry.
gosh. So I worked for the state. I worked for the DNR for a season. I worked in a soils lab. I worked for Isle Royal National Park, working for their research division for a little bit. Then I did some cultural work for them. Then I did some educational work for them. I did a lot of outreach with some kids, working for the college, doing like they're called like family science nights. Oh gosh, what else did I do? I worked at a wildlife rehab. I'd have to go back to my resume. It's been so long now.
No,
But yeah,
it all just kind of led you to here.
yeah. And the big thing I always tell people too is network. And I know it's easier said than done. Reach out to professionals because most of the time, they're more than willing to help you.
Mhm.
And they want to talk to you because they were all in your shoes once upon a time too. And they knew how intimidating it was to talk to people. And I was in the Wildlife Society. I was an officer in my student chapter, and I went to a conference. It was my senior year, and somebody talked about wildlife damage management with USDA Wildlife Services. And it was interesting to me because in college, I started fur trapping. I was, getting my boots dirty with just trapping raccoons, learning, the techniques and stuff of fur trapping. And I heard like, oh, wow, these people get to trap for a living. That sounds really interesting. And after he talked, there was a little pause between speakers, and I was just like, you know what, I'll just go say hi. And I walked up to this guy and said, hey, I'm a wildlife major. It's my senior year. I already have some summer work lined up, but what you talked about was really interesting. And he was ecstatic that I had spoke to him. And he's like, why don't you come down to the state office next time you're in the Lower Peninsula? And I was like, yeah, for sure. Month later, I was in Lansing and I knocked on the guy's door. I was like, hey, remember me? And he showed me around the shop. He introduced me to some of the, his workers and stuff. And he sat me down in his office and he's like, hey, I just got this email for seasonal jobs in Alaska. Here, I'll print it off for you if you're interested. And I took it with a smile on my face, but to be totally honest, I was like, I'm never moving to Alaska. That sounds awful. Like I was such a homebody. I've never, moving to Michigan Tech, I thought was going to be the biggest adventure of my life, just in a different part of the state alone. And so I took it and it was like, okay, yep, I'll do this. And then I just decided one day, I was like, I'll just give this guy a call. I'll just give this guy a call in Alaska. So I called him up and he's like, okay, well, you're still in college. Maybe we'll be able to find something for you. And he's like, how do you feel about just wildlife surveys? And I was like, that sounds great. I can do that. And so next thing I know, 4 months later, the day after I graduated, they flew me out to Anchorage and I got to train for a couple of days. They flew me out to Kotzebue, Alaska. And Kotzebue, Alaska is this remote village. It's on the Arctic Ocean. It's like 30 miles north of the Arctic Circle. The closest road system is over 500 miles away.
Oh, wow.
And I was petrified. I think if there's something for people to understand is that for you to go off and start adventuring and doing things, you're going to be uncomfortable. And that's okay. It's going to be scary. You're going to wish you were in your hometown. You're going to wish you had your friends. because when I landed there and I looked around and I was like, I am very different from everybody here. Kotzebue is like 80% native.
Right.
And I'm blonde hair, blue eyed. I stuck out and it scared me. And I remember my first day just calling my mom and just crying that I was like, I made this mistake. What am I going to do here? And, you know, her support has definitely pushed me through a lot of these experiences I've had. But you're not always going to have support too. Like, I'm really fortunate that I had a mom that was super supportive, but you're also going to have people who are going to tell you, you know, that's crazy. Why would you do that? Why would you take that risk? But honestly, I would never change anything. Doing these risks and taking these opportunities like I have given me a life worth remembering. And I ended up thriving up there. I loved it. I really immersed myself in the culture. I learned about the Inupiaq people. They brought me into their homes. They showed me their traditional ways, traditional hunting. My third day up there, I went ice fishing. And I was so scared to walk out on that ice because I was like, are you guys sure? Because like, it's really wet on top. You know, are you sure this is thick enough? Like, this is, you know, it's kind of warm out. And they were like, no, it's fine. And they gave me this traditional fishing rod, kind of looks like a boomerang. And we dropped the spool in it. And I kept pulling it up because I kept thinking I had a fish. And they're like, no, you'll know. I was like, well, I ice fished up in Houghton, like I ice fished in the UP. You know, usually when you feel that, it means there's a bite. They're like, oh no, you're in the ocean, honey. You're going to know. Sure enough, all of a sudden my arm just went straight down and I pulled up this massive fish, the biggest fish I'd ever seen, through this hole. As I'm pulling it up, my line snaps and it fell back into the hole and my heart sank. And my adopted grandpa up there, I call him my adopted grandpa. He just, him and his wife they took me in. They made it great. Anyway, he drops onto his stomach, reaches in this hole and pulls out this she-fish. This she-fish is like over 3 feet long.
Oh my God.
Was massive. And I was like, how did you, like, I was mind blown. How do you know to just drop like that? He's like, honey, this ice is 6 feet thick.
Oh, wow.
You were going through, that fish wasn't going anywhere. That thing was going to be suspended in that hole for a few seconds at least.
Right.
So I was able to catch my first she-fish out there. And that was just the start of my many adventures in Kotzebue, Alaska. You know, when you're in those kind of places and situations, you're gonna be lonely at first. You know, it's gonna be intimidating to be in these kind of new places, but just know that there's gonna be other people like you. There's going to be people who left home. There's going to be people doing seasonal work. And there was a national park headquarters there. And they told me that there were going to be seasonal workers there. And I was like, okay, you know, I waited a couple weeks and then I heard, you know, through the grapevine that these new seasonal workers from the mainland had come up. I walked into these headquarters and I saw this young girl. She had to be about my age and she was sitting at the front desk. I walked up to her, was like, hey, are you a seasonal worker? She's like, yeah. I was like, you want to be my friend? She's like, heck yeah. And she ended up being my best friend up there. And
I love that.
So like just putting yourself out there is definitely going to help you be more comfortable. Sports are great. I brought my softball mitt up. I, you know, found out that they had a softball, like a co-ed league. And I simply just went to the ballpark when I heard that they had started the league. And I just walked up with my mitt to the first person I saw and was like, hey, I'm Megan. I'm new to the area. I'm only here for the summer, looking for a softball team to join. And they welcomed me open arms. And I was able to meet people that way. And so definitely put yourself out there. Definitely just experience humility a little bit. Just, you know, it sucks at first, but it's going to be worth it so much longer in the long run.
I love that you have that like go get them personality. Because for me, I would have been like Alaska is like my dream, right? In that situation, though, I don't think I would have been able to approach people the way that you do. So
I couldn't. Like, if you would have asked anybody in high school that I would be where I'm at now, they would have all laughed. I was so shy. And that's where it's what I'm saying. It sucks when you are really shy and it's scary to talk to people. Sometimes you just got to take a big swallow of something and walk up.
Yeah, you just got to buck up and do it. And like for a softball team, you just be like, I want to do this. Somebody take me in, or like, let's go ice fishing. 3 days into that and you're out ice fishing. the things that you've experienced through this career and like the journey through it to where you are now has to be just absolutely incredible. And like you said, to have those memories to take back with you and carry on with you and create more, like, do you think that the position that you're at in Selfridge is where you're going to stay for a long period, or do you have your eyes set on traveling more and continuing that, or have you already completed kind of all of what you wanted to do?
I don't know. And I'm okay with that
Sure.
because I have learned that you just take opportunities as they come, because you just never know. If you would have asked me when I was in high school or even college, like, hey, would you ever move to Alaska? I've been like, heck no. And then when I was in Alaska, if you would have said, hey, do you want to go work in some sand dunes with the military in a different country? I would have been like, heck no, that's scary. And then if you would have told me, hey, you're going to move back to Michigan, I would have been like, oh, heck no. Like, it's just, you just never know. And you just take the opportunities that come to you. Don't just sit and wait for something that you want, because you don't know what you want really. There's things like, if I would have had anything, I wanted to work with bison and moose and just large ungulates. That was like my goal. And I got to work with moose a little bit in Alaska, but I get to work with birds. And I hated birds in college. Like, I never cared about them. Like, that, they just didn't interest me. I had this ornithology professor who was amazing, and his passion for birds just resonated so much. And it was after that semester, I was out walking around, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, hey, that's a magnolia warbler. Oh, hey, that's an oriole. Oh, hey, like all of a sudden it was like, oh my gosh, I can recognize birds now. This is kind of cool. And if I saw that job opening and was like, oh, you just get to work with birds all the time, I probably would have been like, heck no. But I just took it because you never know.
Right.
And just taking those opportunities. So, after I left Kotzebue, it's wintertime in the wildlife field. You'll especially learn, especially early on, that you're going to work a lot of seasonal jobs. And wintertime is probably the hardest season to try to find work. And living in Kotzebue, I was able to make some like decent money, and was like, you know what? I've got nothing to do. I want to go to Africa. I've always wanted to go to Africa. Like, who doesn't want to go to Africa? And so I started looking at safaris and different tourism things. And then I realized I saw this website on ecotourism, and there's this program called Wildlife Act, where they work with reserves in South Africa, chasing or doing radio telemetry, chasing around the African wild dog specifically, and collecting data on it. And it was ecotourism. So you didn't have to have a background in it. And it was just a way to it was a way for people to experience the backcountry of Africa, but also get to help with conservation. And when I looked at the prices and stuff, I couldn't rattle it off now, but I mean, it was either I'd go on a safari for a week, or I could live in Africa for 2 months for almost the same price.
Oh, wow.
So that's what I did. I, reached out to them, I applied, they accepted, and I got to go to South Africa for 2 months doing radio telemetry, specifically on the African wild dog. But then I got to, we got to look for elephants and rhinos and cheetahs and leopards and just everything you could ever want out of a trip to South Africa. And then on top of it, you're getting to help with conservation and getting to really learn about, how they do wildlife management in other countries.
Yeah.
And getting to also work with just people from around the world. I mean, I was the only American in my group, and getting just to meet people from other countries and where these people are coming from and hearing their stories. So, volunteering, I obviously not everybody can just jump up to Africa to volunteer, but volunteering can get you so much. And it was a great resume boost. And going from Alaska to Africa gave me the resume boost I needed to get to go overseas with the military. Because they told me, they're like, at the time, they're like, we don't need somebody that knows exactly how to do airport management. We need somebody that's really comfortable going into these kind of places. And I was able to prove that by just doing my own experiences. But yeah, after Africa, I traveled back to Anchorage, Alaska, and worked at the Anchorage International Airport, also being just a wildlife tech and getting to just do more hands-on. So when I was in Kotzebue, I specifically just did surveys. When I got to go to Anchorage, then I was doing much more of like that, raptor trapping, harassment, getting to hang out on the airfield on a daily fantastic job. I mean, we had a work phone, and every time it went off, my heart raced because it was like, ooh, is it going to be a moose? Is it going to be a bear? Is it going to be a goose? Like you just don't know. It was just so exciting because moose, I always tell people, if you go to Anchorage and you want to see a moose, drive around the airport because there's parks and stuff just outside the airport that just house just dozens of moose. There's just everywhere. And moose are my favorite animal.
Now, do they come through the fences and everything at the airports, or do they not have fences there?
They do have fences. When they get on the airfield, often it's people accidentally let them on. You know, they're going about their jobs. They open a gate and they don't really see the moose walk through the gate while they drive through.
How do you not see that?
Yeah, I mean, ask them, not me.
That must be a big gate.
Yeah. And then they just hang out just, you know, in the parking areas for your smaller aircraft and stuff. So they're around. They're in areas that are unfenced, and they're areas that when they're in the areas that are fenced off, it's not as common, I guess. But when they're just in the area, I know we still try to get them to move out of the area because they are dangerous animals. So somebody that's just driving up to, you know, grab their Cessna and go for a quick ride, and there's a moose at night next to it, you know, we try to get them out of there just for the safety of both parties involved.
Right. Now I'm going to loop back to Africa, because I will tell you, South Africa is one of my favorite places that I've ever been. We're actually going back in August. We're taking a group of women with Women of the Wild on a safari there in Limpopo. With what you did there, was that towards aircraft, or was that just, you said with the wild dogs? Are those like the painted dogs?
Yep, the painted dogs. Yep.
Okay.
Nope, that was not with Wildlife Services. That was just me Googling places to volunteer. That's as simple as it is.
I bet that was an incredible experience. I mean, South Africa is absolutely beautiful, probably one of the most beautiful places that I've ever experienced. But like, to be able to go do that and have that, like you said, that background and putting yourself in that situation, I think it's really neat that that's what you chose to do, to go there and spend, you said 2 months?
Yep.
Gosh, that had to just be just a very cool adventure to be able to go chase those dogs around, and you surveyed them. So are you counting like how many you're seeing, or what is it that you were doing with that information?
They were, so we're doing radio telemetry. So your dog pack would have at least 1 or 2 individuals that had one of the radio collars on it. So every morning we would go out and we would find the pack and see if they're hunting or not. Maybe they just finished their meal. Maybe they were on the hunt. We were going out like 4 or 5 in the morning. And then we would follow this pack around and see what it ate. And then we would survey what they ate. Are all the individuals there? Because the painted dog is one of the most poached animals in Africa, but it's because of by poaching. So they're not the target species. They're the bycatch. So a lot of people in South Africa that are poaching, they're looking for those antelope species. They're looking for food and stuff. You know, we're not specifically talking about the rhino and elephant, like the ivory tray. We're looking at just the local community that's looking to trap a couple impala, some nyalas or something. So they have snares out, and often these dogs are chasing these prey species and they get caught up in the snares. So they're looking out and making sure, is everybody in the pack still there? Is everybody healthy? What are they eating? And they specifically want to know what they're eating because Wildlife Act is trying to collect this data so that they can give it to other reserves and say, hey, we can tell you that if you put a pack of wild dogs in your reserve, they will eat X amount of prey a day. Because sometimes, you know, reserves can be apprehensive about bringing predators in because, you know, well, how much is that going to cost us? How much prey do we need to have available? So they use this data to just help promote the painted dogs. They're both helping the ones that are in their reserves, you know, keeping them safe, on top of also helping promote them as potential predator that they could add to other reserves as well to help build their populations in the wild.
Yeah, because their populations have plummeted. And like you said, with the poaching over there, a lot of people, when you say poaching, the first thing that your mind goes to are the rhinos, the elephants. But the reality of it is it's a third world country, and most of the people there are just looking to survive. So like you said, the impalas, the nyalas, you know, that's the kind of stuff that people are over there poaching to the point of almost wiping everything out. At some point in time, the Gemsbok were wiped out in South Africa, and Texas ranchers were actually who brought that population back. So the history behind all of it with people here in the United States, I think they're very naive of what poaching is and the dynamic of what it really affects, like what you're saying with these dogs chasing prey, and that's how they're ending up in these traps, and that's how these populations are plummeting. That it's very intriguing to me to hear that you did this, and it's honestly something that like I could see myself doing. Like that, the painted dogs are something that I follow pretty closely over there, and that's a really neat thing to just be like, this is what I'm going to go do for a few months. I think it's really cool that you do that. And then, so after South Africa, you said you went back to Anchorage.
Yep.
And you dealt with moose. Have you ever had any close encounters with moose?
Yeah, I did make the news once. There was a pair of moose that were fighting, and I get a call that said, hey, there's 2 bull moose in the middle of rut. They're fighting and they're destroying an airfield fence. And so I was like, okay, that's interesting. So I went and checked it out, and yeah, they were destroying an airfield fence because one moose was on one side of the fence and the other bull was on the other side of the fence. So they were hitting each other through this chain link fence. And these are massive animals. When they hit that fence, you could hear that barbed wire just ping, 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 ping off the top of it. They were just shifting this entire fence line with every blow to each other. And they had been at it for like an hour or so.
Oh my goodness.
There was not much that I could do at the time to these guys are just raging bulls. So there's not really a whole lot we can do. So I was just kind of more worried about the people around because, people were wanting to get pictures. They were trying to get close, and it was like, guys, you got to get back. Like, just let them do their thing.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, one of the bulls ended up getting tangled up in barbed wire. So that barbed wire lines that are run on the top of like a chain link fence,
Mm-hmm.
his antlers are getting wrapped in it. And every time he would hit that fence and pull back, he was pulling more of that barbed wire off, to eventually he just got tired out and didn't want to hit that fence anymore because he was getting just tangled in this barbed wire. He started shaking his head. It had wrapped around his face, it wrapped around his body. And he tried to rub it off on everything. He was rubbing it off on bushes. And my favorite was this person sitting in a car trying to get pictures of this moose. And he walked right up to that car and just started rubbing his antlers full of barbed wire on this car. And I just wish I could be a fly on that wall for that insurance claim. Just, I had a moose with barbed wire, to rub up against my car.
How did you get the image? A moose?
So we ended up working with the state agency, the State Department, and they came out with their tranquilizer guns and was able to tranquilize the moose and bring him down. I was like young 20s. I was like 21, 22 at the time. And I was like, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, like, give me a job. Like, I just want to
touch it.
Yeah, I just let me touch it. And so the biologist was like, oh yeah, here's the clippers. You can cut the barbed wire off. So I walk up to this moose and it's sleeping, and I start clipping the barbed wire off and I get it all removed. And he's like, yeah, just check the fur, make sure there's no like huge gashes or any big, injuries that we should be concerned over. So I rub my fingers through the fur and I just give it a big hug, and it just takes a deep breath. So the best way that I can like describe that is in Jurassic Park, when the couple goes there for the first time and there's the triceratops and the guy like hugs it and it takes that deep breath. I did that with a moose. And to this day, it is still my favorite day. Like, it's just the best day of my life. Because
please tell me somebody got a picture of it.
Yes, I do have a picture of me, working with this moose. It definitely is in a scrapbook because it's definitely a highlight of my life. And
well, sure, especially if they're one of your favorite animals.
They're one of my favorite animals, and it's not an animal you can exactly get close to.
Sure.
On a regular. So
no, did the other moose walk off?
Yeah, he just ended up kind of disappearing. And then the moose that we tranquilized, we were able to give it the reversal. He walked up, walked away, totally uninjured and totally fine. So that's just, again, one of my favorite stories to tell, but that's just shows like you just never know what kind of calls you're going to get working on an airfield.
Yeah, no, that's a crazy experience, but it had to, like you said, just absolutely memorable, something that's going to stick with you forever. And the fact that it's one of your favorite animals makes it resonate with you that much more and stick with you. Have you ever had other close encounters of that magnitude with other animals?
Oh, I didn't think of that one. in Africa, definitely a few close encounters. There was a couple lion cubs that were reported that their mother wasn't around or something, and they looked pretty scrawny. They were really skinny, and people were getting concerned. So we had to go put out a carcass to just attract them so they could try to get eyes on them. And to be it was me and the guide got to jump out, and everybody else is up in the hide looking for lions while we were out there trying to set this camera up on this carcass that had been there, for an hour already. And it's just, we ended up never seeing the lions, but knowing that they were in the vicinity, that there's some hungry lions around, and I am right next to their dinner. Like that was definitely a puckering moment for sure. I don't know how to explain it. Oh gosh, all the raptor species I get to work with, those are all things I get to handle. And if you've ever really looked at a raptor's talons, like those bad boys are nothing to mess with, so you're always in the fear of getting taloned. We wear welder gloves to protect ourselves, but these birds are mad. Like they're mad at you, so you're always got to be on your guard that they may grab your shirt or grab up your arm, where your glove isn't at.
Right.
I think one of the other really great experiences I've had was when I was in Kotzebue. I got to go for a ride along with the caribou biologist up there. He's retired now, but at the time he was doing radio telemetry on the Northwest Arctic caribou herd. So I got to jump in his Super Cub. So he's the pilot, so he was sitting up front, and I was sitting in the seat directly behind him with a box in my hand that was telling us when we were getting close to this caribou herd. So we're flying around the Northwest Arctic, around these mountains, and the machine starts to beep, and we're like, yep, we're close. I think the caribou are below us. And we dropped to just a couple 100 feet above the ground and got to just fly above this Northwest caribou herd that was just weaving like a river through the mountains. And we were just flying right over top of them, just seeing every bull, every female, and they were all running because obviously the airplane's kind of spooking them. But no joke, it felt like I jumped into a National Geographic film.
Oh, I can imagine. That's like you're getting to experience things that most people will only see on TV.
Yes. Yeah. It was definitely a remarkable moment.
The things your eyes have seen are just, it's incredible to me to have that type of experience. And the fact that you get to call this your career, it's a lot of people have a hard time chasing their dreams, but I love that you've put yourself out there and that you have put yourself in a situation to experience things, even, as you were saying, being shy in high school and stepping beyond that to find your passion and pursue it the way that you have is very inspirational.
Well, folks, we're going to leave you there on a cliffhanger. Join us in 2 weeks for part 2 of this podcast. And that concludes this episode of Women of the Wild podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you have any questions or would like to check out our website, it is www.womenofthewild.net. We post different events and everything that we've got going on. We would really like to also thank our sponsors, ACC Crappie Sticks, Girls with Guns, Southern Snare, Sawmill Creek Baits and Lures, RMC Custom Calls, Atlantic Coral Enterprise, Blast and Cast Guide Service, Epler Fur, Feather Moon Calls, Shangolaya Safari, Dr. Josh Farr Children's Books, and Shelly Emmer with Dirty Girl Guide Service. Thank you all, and hope that you tune in 2 weeks for our next episode.